It's November 15th here in Seoul, and I'm Kim Dami. We begin with the stories making the headlines at this hour, starting with the APEC Summit 2023. President Yoon is off to San Francisco today to attend the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation Summit, which could include a possible sit-down with Chinese leader Xi Jinping. Yoon is expected to underline the spirit of a stronger solidarity to advance trade and investment liberalization. And ahead of his summit with Xi in the Bay Area, U.S. President Joe Biden says his goal of the meeting Xi is not an attempt to decouple from China, but to pursue better relations. The White House says it has intelligence backing Israel's claim that Hamas has a command center under Al-Shifa hospital. Israeli military forces say it has captured the Hamas parliament and other buildings in the city, and that Hamas has lost control of northern Gaza. World leaders are making their way to San Francisco this week to attend the APEC Summit. Now, that includes President Yoon, who is looking to call for a stronger solidarity and promote trade liberalization. Our Kim Do-yeon starts us off.
Amid crises and challenges, from the conflict between Israel and Hamas and the war in Ukraine to climate change and supply chain disruptions, President Yoon embarks on a mission to boost South Korea's status as a global pivotal state as he heads on Wednesday to San Francisco for the APEC Summit.
저는 세계 GDP의 60% 이상을 차지하는 회원국의 정상들이 한데 모이는 이번 회의에서 공급망 다변화와 무역 투자 확대와 같이 우리 경제에 실질적으로 보탬이 되는 협력 방안을 논의할 것입니다.
As soon as he lands, before he starts his official diplomatic events, he's set to meet over lunch with local Koreans and people of Korean descent, a customary schedule that he has kept for most of his overseas trips. His first event related to the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation is the APEC CEO Summit, a business forum run by the chairing country, the U.S. At that summit, Yoon will give a keynote speech. He then will attend a reception for the leaders and end his first day in San Francisco by meeting young leaders in technology. The official working sessions for APEC will start on Thursday under the theme of creating a resilient and sustainable future for all. Laying out South Korea's role in global cooperation, Yoon will attend the meetings and offer support to countries vulnerable to climate change. He'll also emphasize the need for multilateral efforts to strengthen supply chains and establish digital ethical standards amid the rapid evolution of artificial intelligence. Amid a series of APEC meetings, Yoon's sideline meetings with other leaders are also noteworthy. First, he's set to attend a summit of the U.S.-led Indo-Pacific Economic Framework, also known as IPEF. He's also set to meet his Japanese counterpart Fumio Kishida and jointly deliver a speech at Stanford University. With a sideline summit between U.S. President Joe Biden and China's Xi Jinping, there is also a possibility that a sideline meeting between Yoon and Xi could happen. In terms of regional security, President Yoon has said that during the APEC summit, he will bring up the arms exchanges between North Korea and Russia to emphasize what this really means to global security. Kim Do-yeon, Arirang News.
And much attention is being drawn to the highly anticipated summit between U.S. President Joe Biden and Chinese leader Xi Jinping. Ahead of the summit, Biden couldn't stress enough how Washington is not looking to decouple from Beijing, but to bring soured relations back on track. An Sung-jin reports.
U.S. President Joe Biden spoke to the press before taking off for the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation Summit in San Francisco on Wednesday. And in response to the question of what he is hoping to get out of discussions with his Chinese counterpart Xi Jinping, Biden emphasized normalized relations between the two countries.
As I told you, we're not trying to decouple from China, what we're trying to do is change the relationship for the better.
This comes as U.S. officials work to restore military communication, especially with ongoing issues surrounding the One China principle on Taiwan and U.S. support for the Philippines in the conflict in the South China Sea. However, Biden also warned that despite efforts to stabilize the relationship, the U.S. would not give in to China's zero-sum diplomacy, as seen with past U.S. restrictions on exports of chips to China.
But I'm not going to continue to sustain the support for positions where if we want to invest in China, we have to turn over all our trade secrets.
The meeting in San Francisco will be their first face-to-face in a year. White House National Security spokesperson John Kirby said that as President Biden focuses on current issues, he will be discussing the Israel-Hamas conflict and hoping to persuade Xi to use his influence in Iran to prevent Tehran from stoking tensions in the region further. Russia's invasion of Ukraine as well as economic issues between the two countries will also be high on the agenda. 안성진, Arirang News.
So, U.S. President Joe Biden and Chinese President Xi Jinping will look to turn back the clock on increasingly complicated U.S.-China relations. Now, will they be a breakthrough, though? Let's connect with the Voice of America correspondent Jessica Stone over in San Francisco. Hello there, Jessica. Great to have you back.
Good to be here.
Jessica, the two leaders are meeting for the first time in almost a year. Now, they have a lot to cover, from talks on Taiwan to escalating tech battles. What's on the agenda at the summit this time?
Well, first of all, I think it's important to point out that they've slated 4 hours of talk time between the two leaders. Last time they met face-to-face in Bali, Indonesia, they spoke for 3 hours face-to-face. And as you mentioned, this is the first time in almost a year that these two leaders of the two largest economies in the world are meeting face-to-face. They will do so about an hour's drive from here in San Francisco. They're going to be taking place their talks at a place called the Filoli Estate. And what's really key about the Filoli Estate is that it is a very beautiful mansion with grounds and lots of orchards and walking trails. And interestingly enough, one of the walking trails has a bridge upon it that crosses the San Andreas Fault. That is the fault that goes between the Pacific tectonic plate and the North American tectonic plate. So you can see some of the symbolism there in the place that they have chosen to do these talks. We may see some iconic photographs of those two leaders that might harken back even to the Obama-Xi Sunnyland Summit, which you remember also took place in California. So these two leaders will have face-to-face meetings. They'll have a working lunch. They'll have a stroll through the grounds. And there'll also be some smaller meetings with some of their officials, including National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan and Secretary of State Antony Blinken. And then, of course, Xi Jinping also has other meetings with the CEO Summit, and will make some remarks later Wednesday evening to those CEOs who have gathered at least $40,000, in some cases a plate, to hear him speak and see what's in it for the business community to invest in China.
Sure, the duration of the summit and the venue, it looks like they are really putting their efforts for that summit to happen. Now, is the U.S. then expecting the summit to be a game changer, maybe? What are Washington's hopes at the moment?
Well, they have really sought to tamp down high expectations. I've been covering U.S.-China relations long enough to remember when we would get large outcomes from these meetings. We're talking about a major outcome that they want to achieve is just simply reopening the communications between the two militaries. That came up in the Chinese spy balloon incident earlier this year, which was ultimately shot down by U.S. forces. But Washington was very concerned that they couldn't get anybody from Beijing on the phone. They want to make sure that there is an opportunity, a line of communication, a hotline, if you will, between the two militaries to de-escalate anything that might happen, not only in the airspace above the United States, but of course, in places like the South China Sea and the Taiwan Strait. So that's an important outcome they're looking for. As your reporter ahead of me mentioned, they're also looking for a deliverable on Iran. They would like the Chinese to use their close relationship with Tehran to get them to stop funding Hamas and to certainly get them to de-escalate any involvement or any potential involvement of Hezbollah out of Lebanon. They don't want to have a second front open up in the Middle East, where they're already assisting the Israelis, of course, in the Gaza Strip. So that's a second major possible outcome that the U.S. is looking for. But again, in terms of trade and investment, in terms of business relations, we don't expect huge deliverables to come out of this summit. It would be sufficient in many people's eyes here in the United States to just get these two countries talking, especially at the leader level, because it's been 12 months, and that's a long time for the two largest economies not to be speaking at the leader level.
Right, maybe it is time to really normalize their relations. Now, certainly it's not just President Biden who's been wanting to make Xi-Biden summit happen. Then how are other APEC nations taking advantage of U.S.-China trade tensions?
Oh man, are they really trying to do so, right? Because even though the U.S. has very much expressed its lack of desire to decouple from China, it is clearly sending the signals around the world that it wants to partner more closely with nations that have a friendlier political outlook and a friendlier relation. So we're talking about Mexico and Vietnam are the primary beneficiaries of what's called friendshoring, where the U.S. is not only increased its export controls and its tariffs on Chinese goods, but it's also incentivized U.S. companies to the tune of $500 million in the CHIPS Act for investing overseas in more durable supply chains that leave China out, essentially trying to increase the supply chain for autos going into Mexico and into Canada, and increasing the supply chain for semiconductors in Vietnam. And so you've already seen some incentives announced and some announcements come out of a place called I believe I have the note here, Amcor Technology announcing a plan for semiconductors in Vietnam. And there are other ones as well that are looking to increase their investment in Vietnam.
Sure. Now, we just talked about APEC outcomes. Now, let's talk about potential IPEF announcements. That's the Biden administration's first major trade initiative in the Pacific Economic Framework, and possible political fallout for President Biden.
Yeah, and this reminds me very much of covering the uproar over TPP. If you remember, 2 trade agreements ago, we had the Trans-Pacific Partnership. All of these APEC nations were once again looking to coordinate, not through a framework, but through a free trade agreement and through a free trade zone. That was very much taken down domestically here in the United States. The current U.S. Trade Representative, Catherine Tai, believes that it cost Hillary Clinton the election a couple of presidential elections ago. And the Biden administration, by all accounts, is also feeling similarly pressured by other Democrats. The president's party is essentially saying, if you go forward with the trade pillar of this agreement, we are worried that it's going to cost you the presidential election. So President Biden facing real pressure to basically dump the entire trade pillar of the IPEF. They've already reached a supply chain agreement earlier this year. The other 2 pillars are clean energy, where they could see some outcomes during these sets of talks, and anti-corruption, which is less likely.
Definitely much pressure on his shoulder. All right, Jessica, thanks so much for that coverage, as always.
You bet.
Staying in the U.S., the White House said Tuesday that it has evidence Hamas using Al-Shifa Hospital to operate military actions. Now, the remarks come amid harsh criticism from the international community over fighting close to the crippled hospital where thousands of people are taking refuge. Lee Seung-ja has more.
The White House on Tuesday said it has intelligence indicating that Hamas is using Al-Shifa Hospital in Gaza to run its military operations, supporting Israel's initial claims. Speaking to reporters on board Air Force One, White House's national security spokesperson John Kirby said that Hamas has stored weapons at the hospital, adding that using the hospital for military operations is a war crime. Hamas says the claims are untrue. With the surrounding area the scene of intense fighting in the past week, the hospital suffering from energy shortages and dwindling supplies, the Gaza Health Ministry says at least 32 patients, including 3 premature babies, died over the weekend. As the Israeli military continues to seize key Hamas facilities during ground offensives in the Gaza Strip, Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant declared that it has completely taken control of northern Gaza. Gallant added that no place will be safe for Hamas until Israel's mission is complete and they bring back all the hostages taken by the Palestinian militant group. Israel also said it had successfully taken over Hamas's parliament building, other government buildings, military and police offices, and intelligence bureau. And as the Israeli forces advance to the center of Gaza City, the IDF says it has found large weapons caches and explosives at many civilian sites, including at mosques and Al-Quds University in Gaza City. Meanwhile, the US and the UK announced a fresh round of sanctions on Tuesday, targeting Hamas. The US's third round of sanctions this time targets key Hamas officials. It also targets mechanisms through which Iran provides support for Hamas and its ally Palestinian Islamic Jihad. The UK, on the other hand, sanctioned 4 Hamas senior leaders and 2 financiers, including the militant group's political leader in Gaza and the commander of its military arm. The sanctions aim to cut off funding for Hamas following its deadly attack on Israel last month. 이승재, Arirang News.
Top diplomats of South Korea, the U.S. and Japan have met in San Francisco on the sidelines of the APEC Summit. South Korean Foreign Minister Park Jin sat down for talks on Tuesday local time with his U.S. and Japanese counterparts Antony Blinken and Yoko Kamikawa to address growing concerns on military cooperation between North Korea and Russia, as well as other regional and global issues. They last met on the margins of the UN General Assembly in New York back in September. The U.S. State Department has approved a potential sale to South Korea of advanced SM-6 missiles aimed at intercepting North Korean missile or air threats. According to the Pentagon on Tuesday, the State Department has approved the sale of some $650 million of Standard Missile 6 Block I missiles that were requested by the South Korean government. The SM-6 can directly track targets with its own radar at a maximum range of more than 400 kilometers. It can intercept airplanes, ballistic missiles, and cruise missiles. The U.S. also approved the sale of these missiles to Japan last year. Now, the final approval requires a congressional vote. On Tuesday, defense ministers and representatives from South Korea and the UN Command member states convened here in Seoul, vowing a joint response against any attack that challenges the security of the country. Our defense correspondent Choi Min-jung reports.
South Korea and the UN Command member states have vowed unity against challenges posed on the Korean Peninsula. In a joint statement following the inaugural defense ministerial meeting on Tuesday, defense ministers and representatives declared that they will be united upon any renewal of hostilities or an armed attack on the Korean Peninsula, challenging the principles of the UN and the security of South Korea. The member states reaffirmed that the promise and spirit of the 1953 Armistice Agreement continues to be necessary for the protection of peace and democracy on the Korean Peninsula today, as it was in the past. In a written congratulatory message during the meeting, President Yoon stressed that the UNC is a strong source of power in the defense of South Korea. Meanwhile, Defense Minister Shin Won-sik sent a strong warning to North Korea.
This is a warning to North Korea. Unlike during the Korean War, North Korea is now a member of the UN. Therefore, if it illicitly invades South Korea again, it will be attacking the UNC, a self-contradicting move for a UN member state.
Shin added that Pyongyang's provocations are bound to be followed by strong punishment from the international community centered on the UNC. He also stressed that countries that help North Korea will receive the same punishment. This was echoed by the U.S. Defense Secretary, who expressed deep concerns about the recent growth in military cooperation between North Korea and Russia.
The DPRK is providing lethal aid to Russia to fuel Putin's cruel war of choice against Ukraine. And Russia is providing more support for the DPRK's wide-ranging illicit activities. Now, these activities do not just threaten the ROK, they also erode the rules-based international order that has brought prosperity and peace for the past 70 years.
South Korea on Tuesday hosted the first ever defense ministerial meeting with UNC member states. Defense ministers and representatives of 17 UNC members attended the meeting. The UNC was set up in 1950 to support South Korea against North Korea and now oversees the Korean War Armistice. It consists of 17 member states that protected South Korea from armed aggression during the Korean War and fought under one flag to restore international peace. Choi Min-jung, Arirang News.
Good morning, I'm Kim Ji-young, and we'll now turn over to stories from around the world. To start us off today, U.S. President Joe Biden announced on Tuesday the allocation of $6 billion in new investments from the Inflation Reduction Act to address climate change, coming in coordination with the release of the Fifth National Climate Assessment, or NCA-5. The new investment plan focuses on ways to make the U.S. more resilient to the impact of climate change. These include modernizing the electricity grid to prevent wildfires and withstand extreme conditions, as well as reducing flood risks. While the NCA-5 shows a decline in U.S. greenhouse gas emissions, even with the increase in GDP and population, the Biden administration is also using newly allocated funds for ecosystem conservation and advancing environmental justice through Environmental Protection Agency programs. Now, moving on to a Russian government delegation led by Natural Resources Minister Alexander Kozlov that arrived in North Korea early Tuesday. Kozlov's arrival took place on the same day as the U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin met with the UN member states in Seoul. North Korea's state-run Korean Central News Agency said Wednesday that Russia and North Korea conducted talks on science and technology as well as the economy, while announcing their progress on the regime's ballistic missile program about the new engine that has passed the static tests. Amid concerns over China and Russia potentially supporting the expansion of North Korea's military capacity by assisting North Korea to evade UN sanctions, Kozlov said Russia is willing to develop substantial cooperation with North Korea following September's agreements made in a meeting between Kim Jong-un and Vladimir Putin. Now, moving over to Mexico, where the country's first openly non-binary magistrate, Jesus Ociel Baena, has been found dead. Baena was confirmed by the state prosecutor's office to have been found dead at home on Monday morning in the central Mexican city of Aguascalientes. They were alongside another person who the local LGBTQ+ rights group has identified as their partner. Baena made history in October 2022 when they were made the magistrate for the Aguascalientes State Electoral Court. As one of the most visible LGBTQ+ figures in the country, publishing on social media photos and videos wearing skirts and heels, Baena was known to have received threats of violence regularly. Mexico Security Secretary Rosa Rodriguez said in a press briefing that it is unclear whether the death was a homicide or an accident. And finally, the Caribbean island of Dominica is creating the world's first marine protected area for the endangered sperm whale. The Dominican government announced on Monday that this will ensure one of the Earth's largest animals will come under protection by law. Around 800 square kilometers of the ocean to the west of the island will serve as a key sanctuary, providing nursing and feeding grounds. Sperm whales are essential to the marine environment as their feces provide nutrients for plankton, which capture carbon dioxide. Prime Minister of Dominica, Roosevelt Skerritt, commented that not only the majestic and highly intelligent animals will be safe, but the reserve will help keep the climate healthy.
Good morning. The thermometer is saying the mercury is a few degrees higher than at the same time yesterday, but I couldn't really tell the difference. But highs will return to the norms this afternoon in most parts. Tomorrow is a Suneung Day with the college entrance exam taking place nationwide. It will not be very cold on the way to the exam site, but by the time test takers are heading home, they'll need an umbrella and a thicker jacket. Rain is in the forecast in the west in the morning, spreading nationwide by the afternoon. And do expect to see 5 to 30 millimeters of showers with thunder and lightning at times. Now back to today's forecast. Sunny skies are in the forecast nationwide, with highs going a couple of notches higher than Tuesday. Seoul will be topping out at 12 degrees Celsius, Daegu, Gwangju at 15 degrees. Then brace yourselves for a midwinter chill on Friday. Tomorrow's rain will bring a real chill to the country with a mix of rain and snow expected for most places on Friday. That's Korea for you, and here's a look at the international weather conditions.
We thank you for watching New Day at Arirang. We'll be back tomorrow for Thursday's edition at the same time, 9 a.m. Korea time.